When the lawyer read my father's will, my name wasn't on it. I remember watching the words pass across his lips like dust in sunlight. Weightless and final, Andrew leaned back in his chair, pretending not to notice the way my hands stilled on the table. Evelyn folded her napkin with surgical precision and said, "Your father wanted peace. Caroline, you of all people should respect that." Wet. I looked at her and replied, "I am respecting it. Civility just looks different when you understand the law." She smiled, the kind of smile that believes it already owns the room, and said, "Don't make this harder than it has to be," Andrew added. "You weren't exactly close to him." "Caroline, let's be civil about this." I kept my tone level. "I am being civil. You'll recognize the difference when I stop." 9. Silence settled like smoke. Heavy and slow. The air smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. The language of old money pretending to be moral. I signed the acknowledgement copy because I wanted the record to show that I was there, that I heard the lie as it was told. When I handed the pen back, Evelyn said, "This is what he would have wanted." I answered, "Then he should have written it himself." That day I realized I hadn't been forgotten. I'd been deleted for efficiency, edited out of a legacy that preferred clean lines to complicated truths. Andrew's reflection in the glass behind the lawyer's desk looked almost proud, like a man rehearsing for ownership. I felt no shock, only a quiet accounting. Every omission leaves a paper trail, and I had just found mine. In that stillness, I knew one thing for certain: they didn't inherit the law, they borrowed it, and I intended to collect. Moore and Associates had always been described as a family firm, though the word family carried more weight than the truth could bear. My father built it with the precision of a craftsman. Evelyn and Andrew expanded it with the greed of collectors. They called me the quiet one, the distant daughter who chose to work elsewhere. But distance was the only way to stay sane. Evelyn once said, "Your father's firm thrives on loyalty." And I answered, "That must be why I was asked to leave." I'm so. At Sunday dinners, the conversation always circled back to legacy. Andrew would lean forward, eyes bright, saying he wanted me to modernize the firm, bring in higher-profile cases. Evelyn would nod and add, "Your father believed in tradition, Caroline, but not in chaos." I'd reply, "Tradition is just what survives the editing process." And the table would go silent long enough for her to change the subject. Those dinners were never about food. They were about rehearsal. Evelyn liked to speak in contracts disguised as conversation. She'd say, "I hope you're content where you are." And I'd smile. Contentment is a tax bracket, not a feeling. Andrew would laugh too loudly, pretending not to hear the warning beneath it. In that house, courtesy was currency, and I learned to spend mine sparingly. Every compliment came with an invoice attached. When Nora Hill called from the courthouse, her voice carried that careful tone reserved for bad news. She said, "The system shows the old will was voided last year. Someone from Moore and Associates filed the request." I asked, "Filed under whose authority?" And she answered, "Internal counsel override." I thanked her, though my pulse barely moved. In this family, paperwork had always been a weapon, and Evelyn was fluent in its use. The law was their language. I had just decided to speak it back. Jacob Stein's office smelled of dust and patience. He looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were still sharp behind the tired kindness. When I told him my name, he nodded once and said, "Your father came to see me 2 years ago. I drafted 2 versions of his will, but only one was meant to stand." I asked which one survived, and he replied, "The one that never left my drawer." I won. He opened a thin folder and slid a page toward me. He removed Evelyn as executor, Jacob said quietly. He named you instead. I kept my voice steady. Then why does the court show otherwise? He sighed. Because someone filed a replacement using my firm's letterhead. Long after I retired. It's not Ost. I read the signature his. But not his. You could contest it, he said. But it'll turn into spectacle, I answered. Spectacle's what they wanted. I'm only interested in record correction. Jacob smiled faintly, as if recognizing something inevitable. Your father trusted you more than you think. He left a recording. 2. Dine. The tape was small, labeled in his handwriting. Jacob pressed play. And my father's voice filled the room. Steady and unhurried. If anything happens to me, Caroline inherits control. She understands the business. And she'll know what's right. Jacob looked at me. Now you do, I said. Yes. And now I know what they feared most: clarity. One of the brang. Outside. The air felt different. Thinner somehow. I folded the document once and placed it inside my bag. The ink had begun to fade. But the words still held weight. Some truths don't need to shout. They only need to exist long enough to be found. As I walked away, I realized I wasn't searching for justice anymore. I was preparing the evidence. The invitation arrived on embossed stationery. Gold lettering that smelled of entitlement. Evelyn had written, "You're welcome to join us for the Moore Legacy dinner." It would mean a lot to the family. I showed it to Nora, who read it twice and said, "You know, they just want your silence to look polite." I told her, "Politeness is their language. I'm fluent enough to weaponize it." Andrew was already boasting online about his upcoming promotion, calling it a milestone in the family's journey. Nora frowned at the screen. "You're actually going to sit through that dinner?" I answered. "Not as a guest. As evidence," she said. "You think exposing them in front of everyone will fix anything?" I replied. "It won't fix the past. It'll correct the record." 1. Jacob called the next morning. His tone weary but proud. "I've reviewed the signatures. Caroline, there's no question the second will is fraudulent." I asked if he would testify. And he said, "If truth had a voice, it would sound like a sworn statement." I told him, "Then let's make sure it's recorded." He paused, then said, "Evelyn won't see it coming. She's always underestimated quiet people." Ming. When I filed the notarized documents through Nora's office, she whispered, "You know this could end them." I said, "It's not my ending to write. I'm just returning authorship." She looked at me the way people look at something they can't decide is brave or cruel. I didn't clarify. Clarity was coming soon enough. Every step I took left a paper trail. Deliberate and clean. Because nothing terrifies liars more than precision. Before I sealed the envelope to the state bar, Jacob asked if I wanted to include a statement. I told him, "This isn't revenge. It's record correction." He nodded, understanding that some wars are fought through punctuation, not violence. Evelyn built her reputation on integrity clauses and confidentiality agreements. I was about to show her what happens when silence drafts its own clause. When I dropped the file into the courier box, it felt less like a declaration and more like a timestamp. Everything that followed would simply be execution of terms. The legacy dinner glittered with borrowed dignity. Evelyn stood at the podium, voice smooth as lacquer, saying, "Moore and Associates has always stood for integrity." Applause rose like automatic machinery. I waited for it to fade before I said, "Integrity? Then let's start with the record." Her smile faltered just enough to register, and she replied, "Caroline, not tonight." I told her, "Tonight's perfect. After all, legacy is about documentation. isn't it? Andrew's voice cut through the hush. You're not listed on the program. Caroline, please don't embarrass the firm, I answered. Embarrassment isn't the issue. Authenticity is. He tried to laugh. But the sound came out brittle. Evelyn said, You don't understand the consequences of what you're doing. I said, I understand them better than you think. I wrote the outline. When Jacob walked in, carrying the small recorder, a ripple passed through the tables. He nodded toward me and said, Your father asked me to keep this safe. Evelyn's tone turned sharp. Jakob, you're retired. This isn't your place. He replied. That's true, but the truth doesn't need a place. It needs witnesses. The room quieted until every breath felt counted. Jacob pressed play. My father's voice filled the space. If anything happens to me, Caroline inherits control. She understands the business and will know what's right. The sound of him alive again made Evelyn's face harden into porcelain. Andrew muttered, That could be edited. I said, Then sue the dead. Andrew, you'll have practice representing liars. The crowd shifted, their silence turning into judgment. Evelyn whispered, You're destroying the family. I told her, No. I'm restoring the name you stole. Dome. Reporters began recording. Jacob turned to me. You have the original signature. Correct? I handed him the folder. Authenticated and notarized. He looked at Evelyn. I believe the term you prefer is undeniable. She inhaled like someone realizing control had an expiration date. Andrew shouted, You can't humiliate us in public. I answered. You did that yourself when you filed fraud in daylight. Dusted. Evelyn's voice steadied, her composure almost elegant. You think this will make you whole? She asked. It won't bring him back. I said, It's not about bringing him back. It's about letting his words breathe again. Andrew tried to step forward, but I met his gaze. You spent years rewriting his legacy. I'm just putting the period back. He stopped, the sentence closing without him. When the lights dimmed for the next presentation, no one applauded. Jacob whispered, It's done. I nodded, my pulse finally matching the quiet. Evelyn stood motionless, framed by her own contradiction. Andrew looked down. His reflection cracked in the silver of his untouched glass. I walked toward the exit, the sound of my heels counting the distance between us. Behind me, the room carried on pretending to celebrate integrity. Ahead of me, the truth no longer needed an audience. A week later, the firm's sign was taken down, leaving only the faint outline of its letters. Nora called to say, The board suspended Evelyn's license. Andrew withdrew from the Bar Association this morning. I said, Then the record's balanced. She hesitated before adding, People keep asking if you'll reopen the practice under your name. I told her. No. Some inherit titles. I prefer clean pages. Quote, When Father Martin met me in the church garden, his voice was soft. They lost everything. Caroline, do you feel sorry? I said. Not really. Pity feels too close to permission. He nodded, eyes calm behind years of listening. You don't owe them pity, he said. Only peace. I answered. Peace is just justice without the noise. I met Jacob one last time at the courthouse steps. He said, You could still claim restitution. You're legally entitled. I told him, Money won't fix what silence already paid for. He smiled faintly. Your father would have been proud. I said. He'd have been relieved I finally stopped asking for permission. For a man who dealt in documents, that felt like closure written in ink. When I walked past the empty building that once bore our name, I didn't feel victory, just distance measured in truth. Nora asked, "Do you feel free now?" And I said, "Freedom isn't about winning. It's about not needing to prove anymore." The glass doors reflected the sky, colorless and quiet, like something erased but not lost. I turned away, knowing there was nothing left to reclaim. Some legacies end with signatures. Mine ended with silence. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever been cut out by people who should have stood beside you, remember, silence isn't weakness, it's composure. Truth doesn't shout. It simply waits to be found. Subscribe for more stories where justice speaks quietly but never fails to be heard.